Okay, take 3. First, I didn't turn on the microphone, and then I didn't turn on the camera. Things I would do differently in my 45s.
Rafi's Rambles, Rafi's Rambles, Rafi's Rambles.
Hola, you amazing artists, and welcome to the studio. So today we are going to talk about things I would have done differently in my 20s. It seems like there's a trend on YouTube where people have been doing videos of like things I would have done differently in my 20s. And the funny thing about that is that a lot of YouTubers are still in their 20s or even 30s. So like it's kind of fun watching those videos and seeing these young people talk about things I would have done differently. Not saying that there isn't deep insight in there, because there is, but I figured I would add to this video because, you know, my 20s were over 20 years ago. What about you? Would there be 5 things that you would tell your 20-year-old self?
Only 5, huh?
Yes,
man.
only 5.
I was pretty dumb in my 20s. Did some dumb things.
Being able to look back hindsight, especially with the life that I've lived and being an artist now, and realizing that the majority of my life, I didn't do the things that I wanted to do with my life, but having the perspective where I am now, where I am doing the things that I want to do with my life, definitely changes my perspective of how I behaved in my 20s and what would I have done differently back then. So let's get into it and see what I would have done differently back in my 20s. Number 1, I would have done way less people pleasing. Most definitely. I was constantly being pulled in several different directions, trying to make the people around me happy. Either I was walking on eggshells, making sure I wasn't getting in trouble, making sure that I was abiding to the status quo. Friends, my teachers, just people in my family. And basically what ends up happening is you get pulled in so many different directions that you don't even pay attention to what it is that you want out of life. So in essence, you kind of lose yourself in that whole thing. Unfortunately, usually this happens when you're in your 20s or even younger. It just kind of forms as a habit during that time. And so you don't even realize that you're kind of living this life that is based on everybody else's needs and wants and what it is that they expect of you. If I could go back, I would definitely just be like, you know what? You guys do you. Don't concern yourself with what I do. Let me live my life. Let me do what I do. I'm in my 20s. At this point, I wipe my own butt and everything.
I would say the single biggest thing that I wish I knew in my 20s is that your self-worth is not determined by external factors. Man,
that is a good one.
I could have saved myself a lot of pain. A lot of silly choices and a lot of struggles based on the fact that I didn't have high self-worth. We grow up and people, there are people out there that want you to believe that your worth is dependent on what you do, your income bracket, and various other things.
Yeah, and all that stuff is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, I wish I would have listened to people when it came to the concept of love, right? So needless to say, right now, I am in a fantastic relationship. In fact, today, as I'm filming this, it is our 8th anniversary of being married, and Klee and I have been together for 12 years.
And you're my favorite human and my best friend.
Oh, well, you're my favorite. But before that, I went through a series of relationship stuff that I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to put anybody else down out there. Relationships are what they are. They're all growing experiences, and relationships are what you make them. The problem is that I grew up with the idea that this is what it means to be a man, and this is what love is, and this is what all these things are. And even in my 20s, like, I get advice from my family and the men in my family and the women in my family. And unfortunately, the one thing that I did not pay attention to back then was whether or not any of these brilliant people that were giving me advice were in a satisfying, happy relationship themselves.
I did some traveling in my 20s, but I wish I had understood more fully that your social circles will not always be confined to the people from your hometown. And thus, you'll find the people who are actually your people
Yeah.
And thus, you don't need to hang on and cling to toxic relationships just because of proximity, dear Klee. Or anyone.
Oh, that's such a good one.
Yeah.
That is such a good one, yeah.
I guess the second thing that I wish is that I hadn't blamed myself so much. Like, I formed this habit early in life that everything was my fault. So, like, if someone was having a bad day, if something went wrong, any random number of things, I had this tendency to think somehow it was my fault. I took a lot of blame on myself. I'm not saying I should have shunted all responsibility, but I really internalized a lot of blame, and it kind of turned me into, like, this nervous person who assumed guilt where it didn't belong.
I feel like that's hand in hand with people pleasing.
Yeah. I mean, it really did contribute to my people-pleasing behaviors, which were very unhealthy.
I can relate to that, always feeling like it's your fault.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything is your fault. I have a feeling that that might come from growing up with a family member or members that might be like, I can't believe you did that. It's your fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Relatable?
Number 3. If I could go back, I would definitely not blame anyone else or situations or circumstances for why my life wasn't going the way that I wanted it to go. I spent a huge portion of my life, especially in my 20s and earlier than that and after that, basically blaming my parents for how my life had gone, blaming the fact that we didn't have enough money, blaming my schooling, blaming my teachers, blaming certain friends, blaming enemies, blaming my job, basically blaming the weather, just blaming anything out there to justify why it was that I wasn't where I wanted to be in life. Basically, I wasn't taking any responsibility for my life. I was just shifting the blame on everyone else. You don't really have a solution to the issue. You don't have a solution to what is going on with your life, and you really don't have a sense of control.
I reckon the third thing I wish I had done would be ask more questions, speak my mind more often, and not be so afraid to share what I believe about things instead of just going along with whatever everyone else was saying. I had some friends who were like, philosophical, I guess, who would ask the questions and we would have great conversations. But for the most part, I was kind of surrounded by people who just, went along with stuff, wanted you to go along with stuff, wanted you to go along with what they believed, and so on and so forth. No one really taught me how to question things or formulate my own beliefs and be willing to share them until later on.
And number 4, if I could go back, I would just go for it. I do whatever it was that I wanted to do. I would just go for it. I would just do it. Just do it. Stop planning. Stop thinking about it. Stop making excuses to other people. Stop telling people about it and how you're going to do this someday. Just do it. I spent so much time in my life just either planning or thinking that someday this was gonna do that I was gonna do this, or someday, or it doesn't happen. You gotta just do it.
I think my 4th one would be, I wish I had spent less time sleeping and watching mindless television like VH1. And generally just vegging. Now, before you guys are like, ma, 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 I love sleep. I value sleep. I think sleep is important. And I would never deliberately try to deprive myself of sleep. However, I could be considered for the crown championship of sleeping in my teens and 20s. Man, I met my quotas and exceeded them. And not always for good reason. So many creative projects and days off were sacrificed to the sleep gods.
Yeah.
Or the VH1 gods.
Yeah.
I just dated myself for sure with the
VH1 Rock of Love? Is that what you... Oh, you were watching that?
And Flavor of Love.
Flavor. And number 5, if I could go back, I would definitely not settle for anything less than what I actually want. And let me explain that. Essentially, I would settle into whatever life I had without moving up, without just using it as a stepping stone. I would just settle into that life, and it was almost like, okay, well, this is what it's going to be like forever. I guess this is as close as I'm going to get. I guess this is the best that I can do. I guess, there was no belief in myself. Part of this one would be to really develop a much better relationship with myself, really develop a champion within myself, something within my mind that when I had the negative self-talk coming up, that I'd have a champion that would stand up for me and really start to like myself and really not settle for anything less than what I want in life.
And for my final one, I wish I had understood in my mid and late 20s that period of time is not old age. I remember being in my mid and late 20s and thinking, this is it. Like, I am an adult, at least I'm supposed to be one. Like, I've reached adulthood and like middle age, and this is it for me. And what have I done? And there was this existential crisis happening.
Now, as fun as this video is, I want to make sure that I make something very clear here. I don't want to go back and change my life, because there are so many small circumstances and things that have happened in my life. The reason that I am the way that I am is because in my 20s, I stubbornly held on to so many of these insecurities. Do you think you're any less dumb in your 30s?
Like, I'm going to be doing this video again in 10 years, like, oh, man.
What I would have done differently in my 30s?
I was still fairly dumb in my early 30s, mid-30s. I feel like I'm starting to get things figured out now that I'm in my late 30s.
Trust me, I'm in my 40s, and I'm still dumb. So, I don't think you ever get the dumb over with. It just keeps happening. It just keeps going.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yep. I'm very happy with the person who I am now. And a lot of this is because of that, the way that I lived. And the fact that, Klee came into my life at the perfect time and all these situations. I don't believe in coincidences. I think that basically the world is whatever you decide to make it at the time that you're making it.
Well, like you said, honestly, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't go back and change anything, because it is all the bumps and bumbling and random along the way that led me to this point, and I'm very happy with who I am, and I adore you.
And so I love the fact that I experienced all these things, even though that they were negative. So would I go back and change it? No, I wouldn't. If there was someone in their 20s and they were going through what I was going through, I would definitely give them this advice. So basically, I just became everybody's uncle that gives bad advice. So yeah, take it or leave it. Take it with a grain of salt. And I guess that's it. Those are the 5 things that I would have done differently if I could go back to my 20s. And I'm curious to know, what are 5 things that you would have done differently back in your 20s? Either leave them in the comment section below, or make sure that you link us to a video that you may have made on this particular subject or are going to make. Go ahead and leave that in the comment section below. And I want to give a big shout out to our patrons, our awesome patrons who just recently were in the Collab Lab art show with us and are the ones that make these videos possible. Thank you guys. You are freaking awesome. And you guys that are watching this, you guys are awesome as well. I totally adore you, and thank you so much for watching. And if you like this and you want to watch more like this, just go ahead and click right over here to subscribe. And I guess that's it. So I'm going to say adios.